You saved me, so now, according to the sacred law, I must bear you a children," said the Apache woman. The sun hung low over the endless desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and crimson. Elias, a solitary trapper, moved carefully through the rocky landscape, his horse plodding wearily beside him. He had been traveling for days, following a trail he hoped would lead him to richer hunting grounds. Yet, as the afternoon wore on, he realized he had ventured far from any path he recognized. The wind carried whispers of warning through the cacti, and the heat of the day left him exhausted and thirsty. His map had torn in the storm the day before, leaving him with only fragments of guidance. For the first time in his life, Elias felt the deep, creeping fear of being truly lost. He tried to keep moving, but the desert seemed endless. Every hill he climbed only revealed another stretch of barren land. His horse, usually so steady, began to stumble over rocks and dry shrubs, its sides slick with sweat. Elias dismounted and pressed his hand to the animal's flank, murmuring words of encouragement he barely felt. The storm had stripped him of his supplies, leaving only a few scraps of food and a small canteen of water that was now nearly empty. He knew he could not last long if he did not find shelter or water soon. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered overhead, an unusual storm for this season. Elias sensed danger but could not turn back. The landscape behind him was just as unforgiving. The first drops of rain fell, and soon the wind whipped around him in sharp, cold gusts. Sand stunned his face like tiny needles. He struggled to keep his footing on the uneven ground, and then, with a sharp crack of thunder, lightning struck a nearby rock, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. Panic surged through him. His horse bolted, terrified by the sudden storm, and disappeared into the distance. Elias was alone, completely vulnerable in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes and eternity all at once. He stumbled over jagged stones, his feet cut and bruised, and his clothes soaked with rain. Exhaustion blurred his vision. At one point he sank to the ground, his body shaking from cold and fear. He could not stop himself from thinking that this might be the end, that he would vanish into the desert like so many others whose names had been forgotten. Yet a small flicker of determination refused to die within him. He forced himself to rise, every movement painful, driven by a simple instinct to survive. As night fell, the desert transformed. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet so profound it was almost deafening. The moon rose, casting pale light over the sand and rocks. Elias could barely make out shapes in the darkness, but in the distance, a faint glow caught his attention. It was soft, flickering, as if someone had lit a fire. Hope surged within him, fragile but real. With trembling legs, he moved toward it, each step heavier than the last. He could smell the faint aroma of wood smoke, and the sight of the fire gave him a strange sense of comfort he had not felt in days. When he reached the edge of a small clearing, he saw her, Nayeli, a young Apache woman sitting by the fire. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes, reflecting the flames, regarded him carefully. She did not speak at first, only watching him stumble closer. Elias raised his hands in a gesture of peace, afraid that any sudden move might be misinterpreted. She was alone, yet there was a strength in her presence that made him feel both nervous and reassured. Nayeli did not rush to help. Instead, she waited, studying him with a quiet, almost thoughtful expression. Elias's clothes were soaked, his skin scratched and bruised from the rocks, and his lips cracked from thirst. He tried to speak, his voice hoarse. "Please? I need help." The words barely formed, but Nayeli understood. Without a word, she gestured for him to sit near the fire. She moved gracefully, gathering blankets and placing them around him. She offered him a small amount of water from a gourd, which he drank slowly, savoring each drop as if it were life itself. As he regained some strength, Elias noticed that Nayeli's eyes were steady and calm. There was no fear, only careful attention. She worked with a quiet efficiency, cleaning his wounds and wrapping them with strips of cloth she carried with her. He tried to speak, to thank her, but she simply shook her head. In her culture, saving a life was an act of honor and duty, not something that required words of gratitude. Elias sensed that she was not only protecting him from the elements, but also from the judgment of the wider world. A world he had long known was often unkind to strangers. Night deepened, and the fire crackled softly. Elias felt a strange sense of peace despite the exhaustion and pain that lingered in his body. He had expected to face the desert alone, perhaps to meet his end there, but Nayeli had changed that path. She had not only given him shelter, but had also shown him that in the harshest places, humanity could still shine. As he drifted toward a restless sleep, he could hear the wind moving through the canyon, and it seemed less threatening now, softened by the presence of another soul. In the days that followed, Elias slowly recovered under Nayeli's care. Each morning she brought him food, simple but nourishing, and taught him how to find water and safe places to rest. She did not speak much of herself, but her actions communicated a deep knowledge of the land and the rules of her people. Elias began to understand that he was not merely being helped. He was being integrated into a system of respect and tradition that had guided her tribe for generations. The more he learned, the more he realized how fragile his life had been before. He had wandered recklessly through the desert, relying only on his own skills and knowledge, yet he had survived only because of Nayeli's courage and adherence to the sacred ways of her people. He began to feel a mixture of awe and humility. For the first time, he understood that survival was not just about strength or cunning. It was also about trust, honor, and the bonds that connected people even across differences of language and culture. By the end of the first week, Elias could walk without collapsing and even help with small tasks around the camp. The bond between him and Nayeli grew, not as a sudden friendship, but as a quiet, mutual respect born of shared struggle and care. Though he had entered the desert as a stranger, he began to feel as if he had found a place where he belonged, at least for a time. Yet he also knew that the traditions Nayeli followed were serious, and that there were responsibilities that came with the life she had saved. He did not fully understand them yet, but he sensed that they would shape the days to come. Elias spent the nights thinking about his life before the desert, about the people he had known, the towns he had visited, and the freedom he had always valued. Now, with each passing day, he realized that freedom could take many forms. Here, in the remote desert under Nayeli's watchful eyes, he discovered a different kind of liberty, the freedom to live in harmony with nature, to rely on kindness, and to witness a way of life that had endured for centuries. The desert was no longer a threat, but a teacher, and Nayeli, its guide. And so, the story of Elias's first encounter with Nayeli began, a story of survival, trust, and the quiet beginnings of a bond that neither of them could yet predict. He had come to the desert seeking adventure and perhaps fortune, but he had found something far more profound, the mercy of another human being, the lessons of an ancient culture, and the first steps toward a life that would forever change him. As the days passed, Elias began to understand that surviving in the desert was about far more than finding food and water. Every morning, Nayeli would rise before the sun, moving silently through the camp to gather herbs, roots, and fresh water from hidden springs. She taught Elias to recognize the signs of nature, which plants were safe to eat, how to find water beneath dry riverbeds, and how to move quietly across the desert so as not to startle animals. At first, Elias struggled to remember everything. The desert was a harsh teacher, demanding constant attention, and every mistake could be dangerous. Yet Nayeli never scolded him. She simply showed him again, patiently and carefully, until he began to understand. One morning, as the sun painted the horizon in soft oranges and pinks, Nayeli led Elias to a small oasis hidden behind a rocky hill. The water sparkled in the sunlight, clear and fresh, and palm trees swayed gently in the breeze. Elias had never seen anything so beautiful. For a moment he forgot the danger he had faced and simply drank in the scene before him. Nayeli watched him quietly, a faint smile on her face. "The desert has its gifts," she said softly, "but only for those who respect it." Elias nodded, realizing that her words were not just about the water, but about the lessons she had been teaching him all along: patience, observation, and respect for the world around him. As Elias grew stronger, he also began to notice the traditions that guided Nayeli's life. She moved through the camp with care, performing small rituals that seemed to honor the land, the animals, and the spirits of her ancestors. She would sprinkle water over the fire each morning, whispering words that Elias could not understand, and carefully arrange the stones around the fire in patterns he had never seen before. At first, he felt like an outsider, unsure how to act or whether he should speak. Yet Nayeli never dismissed him. She welcomed his curiosity, answering his questions when she could, and letting him observe when she could not explain in words. It was during these quiet days that Elias first heard the phrase that would change his understanding of the bond between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in deep purples and golds, Nayeli looked at him with a serious expression. "You are here because I chose to save you," she said. "In our law, when one life is saved by another, there is a responsibility. One day that responsibility may grow even greater." Elias felt a chill run through him. He did not fully understand her words, but he could sense their weight. She was speaking of something sacred, something beyond mere survival, a law older than either of them, rooted in tradition and honor. Over the next few days, Elias tried to learn more about this law, but Nayeli spoke only in small pieces, revealing just enough for him to understand without breaking the boundaries of her culture. He realized that in her world, saving a life was not a casual act. It was a bond, a promise that required respect, loyalty, and perhaps even more than he could imagine. Elias felt both humbled and anxious. He had come to the desert thinking only of his own survival, but now he realized that he was part of a story much larger than himself. Despite his worries, life in the camp began to feel less like a struggle and more like a rhythm. Elias and Nayeli worked together to gather food, set traps for small game, and prepare meals. Elias noticed how seamlessly Nayeli moved through her tasks, her hands skilled and steady. He admired her strength, not just the physical, but the quiet, enduring strength of her mind and spirit. He found himself listening closely to her instructions, eager to learn, yet aware that he was still learning about a world that was new and strange to him. One afternoon, a sudden sandstorm forced Elias and Nayeli to seek shelter in a narrow canyon. The wind tore at their clothing and whipped sand into their eyes. Elias struggled to stay on his feet, while Nayeli moved with the ease of someone who had faced storms like this many times before. She guided him to a small alcove hidden from the wind, covering him with blankets and shielding his face from the blowing sand. As they huddled together, Elias felt a new sense of trust forming. He was no longer simply a stranger who had been helped. He was someone who depended on her, and she depended on him in ways that neither had yet fully understood. As the storm passed and the sun returned, Elias found himself reflecting on the changes he had experienced. He had come to the desert thinking of adventure, but what he had found was something deeper, a connection to another human being and a glimpse into a culture that valued life, honor, and responsibility in ways he had never known. He began to understand that the bond between him and Nayeli was not accidental. It had been shaped by circumstance, by her courage, and by the sacred laws that guided her every action. Yet with this understanding came uncertainty. Elias knew that the sacred law she had spoken of carried consequences he could not yet fully imagine. What did it mean, truly, to owe someone your life? How far would that responsibility reach? He wrestled with these questions in quiet moments, sometimes staring at the desert sky late at night, the stars shining brightly above him. He realized that his journey was no longer just about surviving the desert. It was about understanding a world he had never known and finding his place within it. Slowly, Elias also began to notice subtle changes in his feelings toward Nayeli. At first, he had admired her skill and her courage, but now he felt something deeper, a sense of gratitude and respect that went beyond words. He saw how she cared for the land, the animals, and the people in her tribe. He observed her patience, her quiet strength, and her ability to face hardship without fear. Each day he learned more, and each day he felt the bond between them grow stronger, shaped not by obligation alone, but by shared experience and trust. One evening, as the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, Nayeli asked Elias to help her with a small task, collecting firewood from a distant grove of trees. The path was narrow and treacherous, and Elias had to use all the skills he had learned to navigate it safely. They worked side by side, sharing quiet conversation and laughter, though neither spoke of the law that had first bound them together. In that moment, the desert no longer felt lonely or threatening. It was a place of learning, of connection, and of a slowly growing friendship that neither Elias nor Nayeli could ignore. By the end of the second week, Elias had begun to feel more at home in the camp. He could move with confidence, anticipate Nayeli's needs, and even offer small suggestions for hunting and gathering. Yet he also remained keenly aware of the sacred law she had mentioned, and of the deep responsibilities it implied. He knew that one day he would have to confront that law fully, to understand its meaning and decide how he would honor it. Until then, he focused on learning, observing, and respecting the traditions that had saved his life. Through it all, Elias came to understand a truth that had eluded him before. Survival was not simply about strength or skill. It was about connection to people, to land, and to the traditions that guide human life across generations. Nayeli had saved him, yes, but in doing so, she had also shown him a way of life that demanded humility, patience, and respect. He could feel the weight of her trust, and he knew that honoring it would require more than gratitude. It would require understanding and action. As part 2 drew to a close, Elias realized that he was no longer just a traveler lost in the desert. He had become a part of a larger story, one of culture, survival, and sacred responsibility. The desert had tested him, Nayeli had guided him, and the lessons he had learned were only the beginning. He did not yet know what the future held, but he understood one thing clearly. His life had been changed forever, and the bond between him and Nayeli was only beginning to reveal its true significance. The days grew warmer, and the desert began to reveal its hidden life. Small flowers bloomed among the rocks, and birds returned to the oasis near the camp. Elias had grown stronger, walking with more confidence, and his skills had improved under Nayeli's careful guidance. Yet, despite his progress, a sense of tension lingered in his mind. He could not stop thinking about the sacred law she had mentioned, the law that connected the life of one person to the responsibility owed to another. It was not a rule he had ever known, and the weight of it made him both curious and uneasy. One morning, Nayeli approached him with a serious expression, her dark eyes steady and calm. "Elias," she said, "it is time you begin to understand the full meaning of what I have told you. When a life is saved, it is not only a gift, it is a bond that grows with time. One day, it may ask for more than you expect." Elias nodded, swallowing hard. He had been waiting for this moment, yet now that it had come, he felt nervous. He wanted to understand, to respect her culture, but he feared what the law might truly demand. Nayeli led him to a quiet place near the river, where the water ran clear over smooth stones. She sat down on a large rock and motioned for him to do the same. The sun was warm, and the sound of water made the moment feel peaceful, but Elias felt a knot of anxiety in his chest. "In our tradition," Nayeli began, "saving a life is not something that can be forgotten. It is a promise that lasts for as long as the person lives. That promise may change your path, shape your decisions, and call for actions you did not expect. It is serious, and it is sacred." Elias listened carefully. Every word she spoke seemed to echo in his mind. He had faced storms, hunger, and exhaustion, but this was different. This was not a physical challenge. It was a moral and emotional one. He realized that he was not just a guest in her world, he was part of it now, connected by a bond he could not see but could feel in every interaction. I understand," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "I want to honor this law, Nayeli. I want to do what is right." Nayeli nodded, but her eyes did not soften. "Understanding is the first step," she said. "Respect is the second. But living it, that is the true challenge." She stood and gestured for him to follow. Together they walked through the desert, past familiar rocks and shrubs, until they reached a small ridge overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking. The valley was alive with movement. A herd of deer grazing near a stream, a family of rabbits darting between rocks, and the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers. "This is life, Elias," Nayeli said. "It is fragile and strong at the same time. Every decision, every action affects more than yourself. That is why the law is sacred. It reminds us that our lives are not separate, that the choices we make have meaning beyond our own survival." Elias felt a sense of awe. He had survived the desert by chance and skill, but he now understood that his survival had also been guided by the wisdom of another human being. Nayeli had saved him not only from death, but from the dangers of ignorance, and in doing so, she had changed the direction of his life forever. Over the following weeks, Elias began to experience the weight of the law more clearly. He found himself thinking of Nayeli not only as a guide and teacher, but as someone whose trust he had a responsibility to honor. Every action he took had meaning. When he collected water from the river, he did so carefully, mindful of the plants and animals that depended on it. When he hunted small game, he did so with respect, taking only what was necessary and giving thanks in his heart. Nayeli noticed his care and occasionally nodded in quiet approval, though she rarely spoke of it. Despite this growing understanding, Elias also faced internal conflict. He had always valued independence and freedom, and the idea that his life was now bound by a law he barely understood was unsettling. At times he wanted to run, to leave the desert and return to the world he had known. But each time he considered it, he thought of Nayeli, her courage, her patience, and the life she had saved. He realized that leaving would not only betray her trust, but also diminish the lessons he had learned about respect, connection, and responsibility. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of red and orange, Elias and Nayeli prepared a meal together. They worked in silence, chopping vegetables, arranging herbs, and tending the fire. The quiet was comforting, yet Elias felt a strange tension in the air, as if both of them sensed the change coming. Finally, Nayeli spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Elias, there are people outside our land who may not understand us. They may not understand why I saved you, or why our traditions are important. One day, they may come, and you will have to choose how you act. You must be ready to honor the law in every decision you make, even when it is difficult." Elias felt a shiver of apprehension. He did not know who these people might be or what challenges they could bring, but he understood the truth of her words. Respecting the law meant more than surviving storms or finding food. It meant living with integrity, even when the choices were hard. He realized that the bond between him and Nayeli was not simply about gratitude. It was about commitment, trust, and courage in the face of the unknown. In the days that followed, Elias began to practice this understanding. He took on more responsibility in the camp, helping Nayeli prepare for longer journeys to gather supplies, and even anticipating challenges she had not mentioned. He learned to read the wind, the clouds, and the tracks of animals in ways that revealed subtle truths about the desert. Nayeli observed him, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes allowing him to discover the answers for himself. With each day, Elias felt the bond between them grow stronger, shaped by shared experience, trust, and the unspoken understanding of the sacred law. Yet the true test of the bond came when a small group of travelers approached the camp. Elias and Nayeli spotted them from a distance, a family of settlers, lost and unsure of the desert's dangers. Nayeli turned to Elias, her expression serious. "You see, the law asks for more than survival," she said quietly. "It asks for action, sometimes in ways that test your courage and your heart. These people need help, and how you respond will show whether you truly understand what it means to honor the life saved." Elias nodded. He had faced storms, hunger, and fear, but this was different. These were people whose survival depended on his actions, just as his had depended on Nayeli's. He approached them carefully, offering water, guidance, and reassurance. Nayeli stayed close, silent but watchful, allowing him to make choices while ensuring safety. In helping the travelers, Elias felt the first true understanding of the sacred law. It was not a burden but a guide, a call to act with compassion, wisdom, and courage. By the end of that day, the travelers had been safely guided back to a nearby settlement, and Elias returned to the camp exhausted but proud. Nayeli watched him with a faint smile. "You are beginning to understand," she said. "The law is not only about what you owe me, it is about what you owe the world. It asks for respect, responsibility, and action. You have shown that you are learning." Elias felt a sense of relief and determination. He had survived the desert, learned the ways of a culture so different from his own, and faced the first true test of the sacred law. Yet he knew that this was only the beginning. The bond between him and Nayeli had grown stronger, and the law would continue to shape their lives in ways he could not yet fully see. As night fell, the desert was quiet once more. Elias and Nayeli sat by the fire, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. Elias realized that he was no longer simply a wanderer in the desert. He was part of a story that spanned generations, shaped by trust, responsibility, and the sacred law that had first connected them. The future was uncertain, but he felt ready to face it, guided by the lessons he had learned and by the bond that could not be broken. In that moment, Elias understood something profound. Survival was not just about the body, but about the heart and spirit. The sacred law was not a restriction, it was a guide, a reminder that life was precious, trust was sacred, and the choices one made could ripple far beyond the individual. And for the first time, Elias felt truly at peace in the desert, knowing that he had found a purpose greater than himself and a connection that would shape the rest of his life. The desert sun blazed high, casting long shadows over the rocks and sand. Elias had grown stronger in the weeks since he first arrived at Naeli's camp, but he still felt the weight of the sacred law pressing on his heart. Every action he took, every word he spoke, seemed to carry more meaning than before. He understood now that the law was not just a rule, it was a living bond, a connection between two people that reached far beyond survival. It was invisible, yet as real as the fire that warmed them at night or the river that nourished the land. One morning, Naeli approached him with a solemn look. "Elias," she said quietly, "it is time for you to face what the law truly asks. The bond between us is no longer only about gratitude or guidance. It is about trust, commitment, and the choice to honor the life saved with every action you take. Today you must decide how you will carry that responsibility forward." Elias felt his stomach tighten. He had learned much about the desert, the tribe, and the sacred law, but now it was no longer enough to understand. He had to act, fully and without hesitation. They walked together to a small clearing near the edge of the valley. In the distance, a family of travelers, lost and frightened, had appeared. They were disoriented, their animals tired, their supplies nearly gone. Naeli stopped and looked at Elias. "These people are strangers, yet they need help. The law asks not only that you honor the life I saved, but that you show compassion and courage to others, as if it were your own life at stake." Elias nodded. He realized this was more than a test of skill or survival. It was a test of his heart. He approached the travelers slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. "You are safe," he said. "Follow me, and I will guide you to water and shelter." At first they were hesitant, unsure whether to trust him, but the warmth in his eyes and the steady tone of his voice reassured them. Naeli followed silently, watching from a distance, ready to intervene only if needed. Elias's mind raced as he led the travelers along safe paths he had learned from Naeli. Every step mattered. Every choice mattered. He understood that the sacred law was not just about rules. It was about living with honor, making decisions that reflected courage, respect, and care. The journey was not easy. The desert was unforgiving, with hidden rocks, sudden drops, and patches of scorching sand. Elias guided the travelers carefully, encouraging the children to step lightly and helping the parents navigate tricky areas. Along the way, he explained how to find water, where to rest safely, and which plants could be eaten if necessary. The travelers listened closely, grateful for his knowledge. But Elias noticed that it was Naeli's guidance that had truly prepared him for this task. He realized that he could not have succeeded without her, without the lessons she had patiently taught him. As they neared the oasis, Elias felt a surge of relief. The water shimmered in the sunlight, and the trees provided shade from the heat. The travelers' faces lit up with gratitude, and Elias felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Yet, he also knew that the test was not over. Naeli approached him, her expression calm but intense. "You have guided them well," she said. "But the law is not only about acts of kindness. It is about the courage to make choices that honor the life given to you, even when they are difficult, even when no one is watching." Elias understood that her words referred not only to the travelers, but also to the future that awaited him, a life connected to hers, shaped by responsibility, trust, and respect. Over the next few days, Elias continued to demonstrate his commitment to the law. He worked alongside Nayeli, tending to the camp, gathering food and helping the travelers regain their strength before they returned to their own homes. He had learned to anticipate challenges, to act with care and thoughtfulness, and to put the needs of others above his own comfort. Each decision he made reinforced the bond between him and Nayeli, and he began to feel a deep sense of pride in his growth. He had faced the desert, the storm, and the unknown, but this, the test of courage, responsibility, and compassion, felt like the true measure of his character. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nayeli called him aside. She led him to a quiet hill overlooking the camp and the surrounding valley. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant river. Nayeli turned to him, her eyes steady. "Elias," she said, "you have proven yourself not only to me, but to the law itself. You have shown courage, wisdom, and respect. The bond between us has grown stronger, and now it is time to decide how you will live with this responsibility." Elias felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. He had been tested, guided, and challenged, and he knew that the moment of truth had arrived. He thought about the life he had once led, wandering, uncertain, independent. And he thought about the life he had discovered with Nayeli, connected, guided by trust, respect, and the sacred law. In that moment, he understood that the desert had not only tested his body, but his spirit. It had taught him that true strength came from compassion, honor, and the courage to act wisely and selflessly. He looked at Nayeli and spoke with a voice full of certainty. "I understand now," he said. "The life you saved is not just mine to carry, but a responsibility I will honor every day. I will act with respect, courage, and care, not only for you, but for all those whose lives I touch. I will live with the law as my guide, and I will honor the trust you have given me." Nayeli's eyes softened, a rare smile appearing on her face. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm. "Then you are ready," she said, "ready to face the future together." The bond between them deepened in a way that was quiet but profound. They no longer needed words to understand each other. Every glance, every gesture, every shared task reinforced the connection that had begun when Nayeli first saved Elias in the desert. He felt a sense of peace and purpose that he had never known before. The sacred law was no longer a distant concept. It was a living guide, shaping his actions, his choices, and his understanding of life itself. The travelers had returned safely to their homes, carrying stories of the desert and the strangers who had guided them. Elias and Nayeli remained in the camp, their partnership strengthened by the trials they had faced. They worked together, laughed together, and shared quiet moments by the fire, knowing that their bond was built not only on survival, but on respect, trust, and shared experience. As night fell over the desert, the stars shimmered like diamonds in the clear sky. Elias looked at Nayeli and realized that he had not only survived the desert, but had grown into a person capable of understanding the depth of the sacred law. He had faced tests of courage, compassion, and wisdom, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the world around him. Nayeli's guidance had been invaluable, but the growth had come from within him. from his willingness to learn, to trust, and to honor the bond that had been created the day she saved his life. The desert was quiet now, filled only with the soft sounds of the wind, the distant river, and the night animals stirring among the rocks. Elias felt a profound sense of gratitude for Nayeli, for the lessons, for the life he had been given, and for the responsibility he now embraced. He knew that challenges would come again, that the sacred law would continue to shape his decisions, but he also knew that he was ready. He had faced the ultimate test, and he had chosen to honor the life that had been entrusted to him. In that moment, Elias understood something he could never have imagined when he first wandered, lost and injured, into the desert. The sacred law was more than rules or obligations. It was a guide for living a meaningful, honorable, and compassionate life. Nayeli had saved him, but she had also shown him the path to a better self, a life of purpose and connection. And as the fire crackled softly between them, Elias realized that this was only the beginning of a story that would continue to grow, shaped by trust, responsibility, and the enduring bond that had been created in the heart of the desert. The days in the desert passed with a rhythm that felt both calm and purposeful. Elias had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident with each sunrise. He moved with ease among the rocks and sand, gathering food, tending the fire, and helping Nayeli in ways that once would have seemed impossible. Yet, even as he mastered the skills of the desert, he never forgot the lessons that had been taught to him. The lessons of patience, respect, and responsibility that came with the sacred law. Each day was an opportunity to honor the life that Nayeli had saved, and he embraced it fully. Life in the camp had grown into a routine that was far from ordinary. Elias and Nayeli worked side by side, their tasks synchronized in a way that spoke of deep trust and understanding. When Elias hunted, he took only what was needed, offering thanks to the animals and the land. When Nayeli taught him about herbs and plants, he listened carefully, marveling at the wisdom that had been passed down through generations. It was not just the survival skills that mattered. It was the respect for life and the awareness of how all things were connected. Elias realized that the desert was more than a landscape. It was a teacher, a guide, and a home for lessons that went far beyond the physical. One morning, Nayeli brought Elias to the edge of a small hill that overlooked the valley and the river. The sun shone brightly, reflecting off the water in a dazzling display. "Look carefully, Elias," she said. "This is the life that surrounds us. Every choice, every action, has an effect. The law you honor is not only about the bond between you and me. It is about how you live in the world and treat others. The desert shows us that life is fragile yet strong, and that the smallest acts can create ripples that reach far beyond what we see." Elias nodded, feeling the weight and the beauty of her words. He understood now that the sacred law was not a burden. It was a guide to living a meaningful life. Over time, Elias noticed subtle changes in himself. He felt more patient, more observant, and more thoughtful in his actions. He could read the sky and the clouds to predict weather, understand animal tracks with precision, and sense when the desert itself was signaling change. But even more importantly, he had learned to listen, to Nayeli, to the land, and to the unspoken lessons of life. He had discovered a deeper sense of empathy, realizing that every living being had a place and a purpose, and that his role was to act with care, respect, and integrity. The bond between Elias and Nayeli deepened in ways that were quiet but profound. They shared laughter and stories, often sitting together by the fire at night, the stars above casting a gentle glow on their faces. They spoke of the past and the future, of dreams and hopes, and each conversation revealed the strength of their connection. Elias understood that the sacred law was not just about repayment or obligation. It was about trust, loyalty, and the shared responsibility to honor life in all its forms. Nayeli had saved him, yes, but in doing so, she had opened the door to a new life, a life of purpose, connection, and meaning. As the seasons changed, Elias and Nayeli faced new challenges together. A sudden heat wave tested their endurance, and a dry spell forced them to find water in unlikely places. Each time Elias relied on the lessons Nayeli had taught him, and each time he acted with care, thoughtfulness, and respect. The sacred law was never far from his mind, guiding him in every decision. It reminded him that his actions mattered, that his choices carried weight, and that the bond he shared with Nayeli was a responsibility he could never take lightly. One afternoon, as Elias was gathering firewood, Nayeli joined him with a serious expression. She motioned for him to sit beside her. "Elias," she said, "you have honored the law not only by your actions, but by the way you have grown. The bond between us is now more than a duty. It is a connection of the heart, a shared path that will guide both our lives. The desert has tested you, the law has guided you, and now you have proven that you can live with honor, courage, and compassion." Elias felt a wave of gratitude and humility. He knew that none of this would have been possible without Nayeli's guidance and trust, and he vowed silently to continue living in a way that honored her and the law. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Elias and Nayeli stood together, looking out over the valley. The wind whispered softly, carrying the scent of flowers and the gentle rustle of the river. Elias felt a sense of peace he had never known. He realized that the sacred law had done more than shape his actions. It had transformed his heart and mind. He was no longer a wanderer lost in the desert, but a person with purpose, guided by responsibility, trust, and compassion. The next morning, a group of travelers arrived at the camp seeking guidance and assistance. Elias approached them confidently, sharing water, advice, and shelter as needed. He had learned from Nayeli how to act with patience and care, and he realized that every life he touched was a chance to honor the bond he shared with her. Nayeli watched quietly, a faint smile on her face, knowing that Elias had fully embraced the law. He had grown from a lost wanderer into a man capable of understanding the depth of responsibility, courage, and empathy. In the days that followed, Elias and Nayeli worked together to strengthen the camp and the surrounding land. They taught travelers and tribe members alike, sharing the lessons of the desert, the sacred law, and the importance of living with respect and honor. Their partnership became a bridge between worlds, between the wisdom of the tribe and the knowledge Elias had brought from his past life. It was a union that showed the power of trust, responsibility, and connection, and it inspired those who witnessed it to live with care and purpose. As time passed, Elias realized that the bond between him and Nayeli had grown deeper than he could have imagined. It was no longer just about survival, obligation, or even gratitude. It was about love, respect, and shared purpose. They had faced storms, challenges, and tests of courage together, and through it all they had remained committed to the sacred law and to each other. Elias understood that the law was not simply a rule to follow, but a living guide that shaped the way he thought, acted, and lived. One quiet evening, as the fire flickered softly and the stars shone brightly above, Elias reflected on his journey. He remembered the storm that had brought him to Nayeli, the days of struggle and learning, the moments of doubt and fear, and the tests that had challenged his heart and mind. He realized that every step, every challenge, every lesson had led him to this moment, a moment of understanding, peace, and purpose. The sacred law had guided him. Nayeli had taught him, and the desert had shaped him into a person capable of honor, courage, and compassion. Elias turned to Nayeli and smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly, "not just for saving my life, but for showing me a path I never knew existed. I understand now what it means to honor the life you gave me, and I promise to live with respect, courage, and care every day." Nayeli's eyes softened, and she placed her hand gently over his. "You have learned well, Elias," she said. "The law is not just about me or the desert. It is about how we live, how we care for others, and how we honor the gifts of life. You have shown that you understand, and that is the greatest gift of all." As the night deepened, the desert seemed alive with quiet energy. The stars sparkled above, the river whispered softly, and the wind carried the scent of flowers and the earth. Elias felt a sense of belonging he had never known. He realized that the sacred law was not a burden, but a blessing, a guide that had led him to courage, connection, and a deeper understanding of life. Nayeli had saved him, but in doing so, she had also given him a chance to grow into a better person, a person capable of love, trust, and responsibility. In the days that followed, Elias and Nayeli continued to live and work together, their bond stronger than ever. They shared tasks, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. They guided travelers, cared for the land, and honored the sacred law in every action. Their story became a symbol of trust, courage, and connection, inspiring others to live with respect and purpose. Elias had found more than survival in the desert. He had found meaning, love, and a path that would guide him for the rest of his life. And so the desert, once a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a home. Elias had entered it as a wanderer, lost and injured, and emerged as a man of understanding, guided by the sacred law, and bound to Nayeli by trust, respect, and shared experience. The lessons of the desert, the guidance of Nayeli, and the power of the sacred law had transformed his life forever, leaving him ready to face the future with courage, compassion, and purpose.